So we're in this like interesting position with all the people we train and stuff like that with our catalog to have these kind of like stats, right? And a lot of the things we're seeing is a lot more people within organizations are coming on and taking like these very general basic courses like intro to AWS and all of these types of things. And it seems that organizations are now trying to basically push down as much information as possible to not just your siloed cybersecurity teams. They're basically everybody in the IT organization should have some like baseline knowledge and things like that. And so we're seeing a lot of people starting to come in that are just not necessarily in the actual offensive or defensive side of the house, but just normal help desk guy trying to learn more and things like that to kind of raise that baseline so that like when something crosses his desk, he can make that split-second decision that he's making, and you hope that because he's been trained enough that it's kind of making the right decision more times than not.
Yeah, do you think that's entirely a function of people trying to educate more broadly their organizations, or do you think there's something to be said for the opportunities that people see on the security side?
I think it's both, right? Because security, I think, is an interesting thing, is like security is now like, it's in the front of a lot of people's minds because of some of the recent hacks and stuff like that. People are now feeling that like personal connection, and I think they're finally starting to think about it in a different way.
Right.
Because it's like, oh, that's my credit card. Like it's now like personal. And so I think that's raising some sort of awareness across the board, which is getting people more and more curious in these types of things.
Sure.
Which is enabling them to kind of start digging. I think IT people always moved more towards security because they're like, oh, that's the next spot and things like that. But I still think it's still just that normal knowledge. Like people, it's starting to become almost like that baseline, like that normal, like I understand what a phishing email is. Like if you would ask that question to people in the HR department 5 years ago,
wouldn't have gotten good answers.
They wouldn't know. And I mean, security awareness training sort of does some of that, but the way this industry and the pace is moving so frequently, it's hard to kind of make relevant security awareness training, especially such large corporations. They do their security awareness training like once a year or once every 6 months. They pack in 100 people to an auditorium and play a video.
Well, yeah, I think it's got to be tough. Security awareness has been a huge problem forever.
Yeah.
And it's tough because people haven't really ever been held accountable for their own behavior, for their own inability to recognize something that's wrong. And I think we're probably starting to see, I always talk about this, where we had 2,000 years to get comfortable with security in the physical space, and we, in much shorter term, to do that in the sea space and the air space. And I come from a military background where, you had warfighting in these different arenas, and cyber is now beneficially recognized as a warfighting domain and as a domain that we all need to be aware of.
Right.
And I guess to that end, like, the awareness piece is challenging, and in order to understand what's normal, you have to kind of understand the physics of the space. And I think if we're all going to be interacting in this space, it makes a ton of sense that people would want to get those fundamentals to be able to be knowledgeable about just even the basics of what malicious behavior looks like, why people would do it, and they do have to care. I think everyone's being held a little bit more accountable. Yeah,
and I think it's also people are starting to care more, and then I think it's also highlighting the fact that like they're like cyber work jobs, like cyber jobs in general, are pretty understaffed. Like not many teams are operating at 100% and things like that, especially with the like a trend here this year at least is a lot of SIEM tools and other companies that are now basically becoming SIEM tools, and just the data analytics and the AI and all the fancy words they're throwing on top is we're just getting so much more information. We're collecting everything, but at the end of the day, we're still short like actual people and things like that. And I think that's like an interesting challenge, I think, because how do you even like keep up with all these tools that are ever changing and things like that? Like with what you guys do, like it's like you're basically trying to help the people that are basically underwater, and so it's trying to prove that value that this we can take care of it, and it's black box, but like it's got its good and bad, right?
I think where you were taking that was as a security vendor, being in a position to go ahead and help people become more proficient, and dealing with the larger challenge that we've got around the dearth of qualified and well-educated people to do the work that is out there. And you're right. I think one of the big things we're seeing even at the show here is the massive amounts of folks that are focusing their attention on the security orchestration, automation, and response.
Trying to pull out that level one.
Trying to pull that level one person out. Or like in our case with Bricata, we're trying to make a solution that gives that level one person the ability to become more of a level three by connecting a lot of the dots, creating a lot of information that they can use in one space. So they might be able to perform their entire job from one aspect or one page of the solution,
right?
But then having the ability to pivot back into the much deeper space to look at network metadata more holistically, right, to start to seek out things like activity that's not generating alerts and to turn that into something interesting. Yeah. So for that guy who's training, of course everyone has to become proficient with their tier one activities, but this gives them the opportunity to become much more involved in the data that they're looking at.
Yeah, and I think you've probably seen it. I mean, we've seen it. Like, I think companies are now starting to pay a lot more attention to cyber. Like, it used to be like it was this one siloed group of people in the corner that would like maybe talk to other people in other parts of the organization, but most of the time it was very siloed. It was them running their own little things in, on their own, and like for app developers and stuff, that would be like the last gate check. And then the IT team was like, oh, I don't know what they're doing. They get alerts, and then I get an email that something's wrong. And I think we've seen this trend where we're trying to like open it up to like allow everybody to be able to see all of these types of things, just so they're more aware of kind of like all the stuff that's kind of happening around, and just giving them more access to the data and stuff like that they need.
Well, yeah, I think it's important. And security is everybody's responsibility, and in the development space, as we continue to push to automate so much of the development and ops space, being we have a requirement to add security to that so that things are being built in from the ground up.
Right.
And I mean, there's a million reasons to do it that way. It's much more efficient. It's much less prone to failure. It is scales a lot better, and it's also more cost effective. Fixing things after the fact is something that costs a whole lot more to fix than if you get them on their way in. Yeah.
So, anything you're excited for this year, Black Hat? Any trends, keywords, buzzwords?
Oh gosh, I am always keeping an eye on the ways that we can help other people by automating. So I am looking at those security orchestration automation platforms. We've built out an API in the product now that we think is going to be really nice for working with some of those solutions.
Nice. Awesome.
And I am, I guess, anxiously awaiting what we're going to see in some of the network space around like TLS 1.3 and things that people are going to have to address in their security programs as we move to these more secure ways of network traffic. Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you.